BREWtally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. For over 30 years, Rockabilia has been the go-to destination for all things band merch. With over 500,000 items in their online store and collaborations with today's hottest bands, you're sure to find something you love. Use our code BREW10 at checkout and take 10% off your total order. So go pick up your favorite new piece of merch now over at Rockabilia.com. And now, on to the show.
Say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
Happy belated New Year, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the BREWtally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guests are Danny Lilker of Anthrax, Stormtroopers of Death, or SOD if you're nasty, Nuclear Assault, and a few other bands as well as his co-author, writer, Dave, I believe his last name is pronounced Hofer, Hofer. They re-released the 10th anniversary edition of their book, Perpetual Conversion. Basically, it's the life and times of Danny through some earlier times growing up, and then obviously the formation of Anthrax into SOD, all the things that kind of happened with him being kicked out of Anthrax and so forth. And honestly, it was just a really interesting book. I grew up with my dad listening to Anthrax and Stormtroopers of Death, and was a thing where, very much knew who Danny was as a young kid. And, even thinking back to remembering kind of this growing thrash scene. And I think out of like a lot of the more aggressive forms of metal from back then, I think I was definitely a lot more into thrash and bands like Anthrax than maybe necessarily say like a Megadeth at the time or something like that. But there just seemed to be something kind of fun, sort of a little bit dangerous, but I think more the fun was really prevalent with Anthrax, especially back in the day. And it was a thing where, reading some of my dad's old music magazines, being very aware kind of early on of like, there's this dude, Danny, he's from Anthrax, he was kicked out, or some shit was going on, and now he's just like doing the most extreme metal at the time, like where it was kind of a little bit beyond classification, sort of. And it was definitely well beyond my realm of being able to understand what this was. I don't remember if my dad listened to Nuclear Assault. Maybe I might have seen a video or something on MTV or like Headbangers Ball or something like that, if memory serves correctly. And I just remember being like, this is nuts. This is too much. It's kind of funny thinking about reading this book and kind of remembering certain bands and seeing them on like Headbangers Ball and, listening to my dad and my uncles kind of talking about some of these bands that they were getting into around this time. And, just kind of the thing that sort of the consensus is like, man, that shit's really, like, it's just noise. And a sentiment my dad would say to me several times over as I kind of found my own way into heavier music. And, it's just these people, are they even playing notes? Are they even playing songs? Is the singer even singing? It's just noise. So it was kind of interesting to go back through this book and kind of be at the impetus of a lot of the foundations of a lot of the more extreme music that was kind of coming out, and feeling like you were sort of a part of it as it's happening, and then kind of hearing, different people from the scene themselves, even if they weren't in the bands that they would later become known for. But it was kind of interesting just to sort of get a feel for the wide-reaching impact that, the early Anthrax demos and Stormtroopers of Death and what that meant to a lot of people, and to even like Nuclear Assault, how like that sort of gave some people permission to go even further down the realm of extremes with metal and so forth. And to kind of read it was interesting because as reading the book itself, I kept reminding myself of like, this feels sort of akin to the journey of like, oh, Danny and a lot of what he was experiencing and a lot of the things that he was getting into to kind of push himself into these extreme forms of metal and so forth, that it reminded me of the journey I kind of went through with hip hop. And I said it kind of in the episode, so I'm kind of foreshadowing this a little bit, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. Is, you know, with hip hop and my love of it, like, there was what I was into, there was what I saw, what I experienced, things that friends through school and friends, you know, that lived around me introduced me to, that kind of started filling voids, where it's like, oh, this person was influenced by this person, and now this person's influenced by this person, and, you know, this is the sound of like the East Coast, and this is the sound of the West Coast, and this is kind of more, you know, Southern and so forth, and just kind of the different fingerprints and the touches everyone was putting on it. But I had a gap, and I don't really, and it took me a long time to figure out where the gap was. And it kind of was in my rabbit hole I was going down of producers, of figuring out, like, how do we go from, like, the DJ in bands, like a Run DMC or like a Naughty by Nature, or, you know, like a lot of these groups had their own DJ, and he was the one, like Dr. Dre with NWA and so forth, that it's like you have these super producers who kind of took what was going on around them, music that they grew up with, in some cases finding crazy samples. But then how did you get to, you know, your late 90s, early 2000s? Like, I knew there was like the Manny Freshes and stuff like that, and Timbalands and all these people, and some of them had roots to going back a little bit further. But it's a thing where, like, how do we get to Kanye? How do we get to, like, Swizz Beatz? How do we get to these super producers? And the thing that kind of I was missing in the transition from the old school to kind of what I was listening to now in current times, I found was Dilla. And it was through my love of producers and stuff like that, and people kind of finding their own sound and different ways to manipulate sounds and samples and so forth. And everyone kind of, when I started going down these rabbit holes, would talk about this producer, Jay Dilla, and about how he just knew where different things were, and how his crazy work ethic of just trying to get better and finding samples and different ways to use them and all this kind of stuff. And then I started listening to, you know, Donuts and listening to a lot of his sort of stream of conscious beat making, and just learning the lore of Dilla. Dilla was the missing piece for me to bridge my old hip hop and R&B and so forth to my new. And reading Danny's book, that was sort of the same thing for me, of like, okay, how do we get to bands like At the Gates? How do we get to bands, you know, Merciful Fate, I guess, to a degree? Like, how do we get to some of these far end extremes? And who was kind of there at the beginning, at the forefront, to kind of bridge the gap for all these people? And honestly, reading the book, it was Danny. Danny kind of is the melting pot of his influences and his chase to just be as free as he wanted to be and express himself in the most kind of, I guess, quote unquote extreme ways, that it was really interesting to kind of be like, shit, this is sort of the missing pieces of a lot of that early foundational part of like extreme metal. And Danny was sort of at the forefront of it. And it kind of felt like I was like, oh, I'm kind of getting that missing piece, even though I was sort of aware of it from a young age of growing up with this music that my parents listened to, or I should say my dad and my uncles and so forth. But it was a really cool chat, and it's one of those where it's a really short one. I'm already like a third of doing this, a third of the way of how long the actual conversation went. But doing this podcast, man, sometimes you just get to talk to legends, and it may not be legends in the sense of like it's a giant household name, but it doesn't make them any less important. So for the sake of convenience of getting into the conversation that you all want to hear, let's get into my conversation with Danny and Dave, and I'll talk to you all on the other side of it. So I feel slightly bad saying this. I think I got about 12 pages left before I was done with the book. I got it a couple of days ago and then trying to get through it. So I didn't get to see how it ended. So hopefully there's not like some big plot reveal at the end that I'm missing. That's, you know, something that I needed to know for now. But given the fact that I think most of the additions were the forward and the front of the book, and some photos being like colorized and stuff like that. I think that was really the only difference. So there's nothing new at the end, correct?
That's right.
Yeah,
Cool.
there's no new just text. There's a new forward in the front from the Thomas the Vocalist of At the Gates, and yeah, there's a new color photo section, but there's nothing yet. It's not much of a plot to begin with, but yeah.
Well, I think maybe for me it's kind of interesting, and maybe it's partially due to the back-to-back nature of the guests I had, because yesterday I talked to Kirk from Crowbar, and at one point through reading this book, I felt like when we were kind of talking about, like, because Kirk was talking about how the West Coast still isn't very good for them touring wise. Like, they do okay in like the major cities, but like he was talking about the tour they're getting ready to do is a lot of like C&D markets. And so he's like we're playing, I don't even know what the fuck it was called, somewhere in like Arizona. He's like, I don't know if we've ever played there. So it'll be interesting to see. But it was interesting because as we were kind of talking about that, I was kind of referencing how I was reading your book. And so it's just kind of interesting to sort of in the last 2 days kind of be talking about things that are happening now, but kind of through looking back through the career of Crowbar and even your full career at this point, Danny. And I got to say, this book is really interesting. This is kind of a question for both of you, but I feel like what's interesting about it is how it feels like such a chronologically going through your career, but also at the same time, it's so interesting to see how what you did from like when Anthrax was starting to then Nuclear Assault to Brutal Truth and everything that you were part of, that you were always on the cusp of everything changing, but it's happening in real time. And the book did a really good job of explaining that through the bands that you were getting excited about and then playing with, and then going, well, I want to create something like that. Here's this demo I'm doing, and I'm passing it along to friends. Literally writing letters to people I thought was so interesting. How is it to kind of look back and did the change in sound actually seem to be happening as quickly as it felt in the book, or did it just kind of feel like every day to you and it wasn't very obvious at the time?
It didn't feel like it happened that quickly then. It's just a slow but unstoppable kind of like wave where I just was just chasing more intense, extreme, more than, of course, evil stuff than what I was listening to and playing at the time. I mean, as far as the bass tone I'm known for, I pretty much have been using a pretty overdriven, distorted bass tone since, the SOD record. I backed off a tiny bit when I went back to Nuclear, but honestly, not really that much. I just already had the gnarl, so that's like strictly if you're talking tone. But as far as my musical path, that just, while, the late 80s, I'm still enjoying Nuclear Assault, but then, somebody played me a band called Napalm Death, and I went, holy shit, what is this? And so at the time, just living in the moment, it wasn't anything sudden, because remember, at the time the book was first released, that's 30 years I was doing stuff. So
right,
it all kind of drifted along.
I think for me, not obviously being of age to remember any of that, it just was interesting because it just seemed like I would go back through and double check the timeline and be like, fuck, was it only a few years, like 2 years? And then like this wave of music is coming through. Then some of the shows and bands you're talking about seeing at CB's, it's like, again, going back through and checking the dates and stuff and being like, it just seemed like it was happening a lot faster than it seemed when I've read about it or watched like the various documentaries and stuff. So I just wasn't sure if in real time it felt like that to you guys, like where it's like, oh, this is just exploding.
No, but it's true when you do go back and think about it that you do have a point there, because Game Over came out in 86, the first Nuclear record, and the last one that I was proud to be on in that era was Handle with Care, which was what, like 89? It's, the Beatles were together for what, 7 years? Did a lot of shit.
Or a little less, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of sure, when you look back on it, it does seem more quick, but at the time, no.
For you, Dave, this, I think I had seen an interview with you just to kind of get a cadence of your guys' speaking before doing this. And I think I remember you saying that you knew Danny, you knew a lot of you knew some of his stuff, but not a lot of it. So you kind of doing this project kind of really immersed yourself not only in Danny's world, but probably everything kind of surrounding it. Something, and I'll kind of give you a for instance to maybe make my question make more sense. So a few years ago, I've been into hip hop for a long time, but there was what I kind of considered pieces missing that I didn't have, that like the transition from this to this. And a big one for me was this dude out of Detroit, Jay Dilla. He was kind of from the 80s and brought things to the late 90s and so forth. And he was kind of my missing piece. And I found a lot of things that tied things together. You going through this process, did that happen to you with your knowledge of thrash and metal and stuff like that? Like, did this book help you fill in some of your pieces you were missing?
Oh, absolutely. Nobody knows everything,
Right.
And I should say, if you have not read, I think his last name is pronounced Charnas, Dan Charnas's book called Dilla Time, which is like a biography of Jay Dilla. Okay.
Just found that the other day at a bookstore.
It's very good. Yeah. But anyway, the example that is very easy to give is that I was just never really like a thrash metal guy. Like I Ride the Lightning and Rain and Blood and some of the, the bigger like touchstones. But I was always just very focused on like death metal and grindcore and punk. And so I didn't really know anything about Nuclear Assault. I knew of them, of course. I'm sure I'd probably seen the Brainwashed video. But that was like one big piece where, I thought it was good to not know every little like detail of his career, because then you can ask honest questions and, not have any sort of like agenda or like specific like slant. I mean, there were certain things that I asked him about because I was interested in them specifically, and I tried to interview other bassists and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it was a learning process. Like I said, that was like one thing I learned working at a record store. It's like people still like will give you shit, be like, oh, I've never heard of so-and-so. Like, oh, but you worked at a record store. It's like, well, yeah, but the amount of things that are out there is just like borderline infinite, so yeah, it was a learning experience in that way for sure.
It's also interesting when you were talking about like missing pieces, because Dave, doesn't Fender's quote on the back cover say something about this book helped me find missing pieces from my childhood or something like that?
Something. I'd have to go grab a copy.
Well, don't worry.
I was going to say, I got a PDF, so I didn't get that.
But yeah, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say, I think
you agree. That's all.
Well, I think like it gets interesting because and I was going to say happy belated to you, Danny, because you just turned 60, and I just celebrated my 40th about a month ago. So it's a thing where, interestingly, I'm kind of recalling different things from growing up. I'm thinking about my life and kind of a broader sense of like, I probably have, in theory, this is probably middle of the road if I lived to 80. And it's a thing, it just kind of, I think it's weird when you kind of start looking back and thinking about kind of these foundational pillars of like how you grew up and so forth. And to me, what was, again, kind of an interesting thing in the book is I feel like you are very, and I don't mean this to sound backhanded, but it's like you're unapologetically who you are. You're a nice person, it seems like, to those that know you. And it was really interesting because there's the Gene Hoglan story in there. And I, as someone who really struggles with taking compliments from people, especially friends, reading some of the nice things people said about you as more so as a person than a musician, to me, I feel like would be a little awkward to read and know that you're putting it out there for people to see. Was that a bit of a challenge for you to see some of the things people were saying? Or was your friendship so far along with these people, you already knew these things, they've said them to you countless times, and it wasn't awkward to put it in print?
Oh, well, I mean, maybe not awkward, maybe just like slightly embarrassing, where you might blush or something, because besides Gene, like Steve Hughes, Craig Satari, I mean, so many people there just said like the nicest, coolest things about me, and, just kind of like an aw shucks moment. Get out of my fucking lemonade. Got a 7-month-old cat here, so good. She's down. She's still completely batshit. So she might attack Heather's feet in about 2, 1. All right. Okay, sorry.
No worries. I just know for me, like reading that kind of stuff, it's while it's indicative of who I am as a person, and I know these things to be truths about who I am, I suffer from imposter syndrome really bad. So when I was reading those things, I was almost getting like secondhand embarrassment where I'm like, oh man, guys, thank you so much. Like, because I know that's, if I were in the same situation, people would say those things about me. And I just feel like it would be kind of hard to not do it and be like, stroke that ego, like put these nice things in about me. Like I would even be like, maybe we don't have that in there. Cause I don't know. It just makes me feel awkward and weird.
It just got to the point where it was like, ah, shucks. And then I was like, all right, well, I didn't want to go, hey, take that stuff out. People saying nice things about it. You know? I mean, it's true about who I am, you know. I didn't want to have a book out so I could settle scores or talk shit or anything like that. And other people have done that. And that would never interest me anyway.
Well, I think you guys both as writer and as the subject matter, I should say, I feel like you guys did a really good job of keeping this authentic, I think, to the scene and the times and everything. Like the fact that, Dave, you kind of laid this out, and I don't know if this is a collaboration idea between the two of you or not, but the fact that it felt like a zine at times, like an old school zine, I thought was really interesting. Like, because it kind of makes the narrative of stuff and kind of breaks it up really well and makes it feel familiar. Even if you don't know who Danny is, it kind of gives it this familiarity of placing you in that time. How important was that to you to kind of set a tone visually along with a narrative like that?
Oh, that was like a key component of it. I got my start writing in zines, and so when we decided to pursue this idea, I just kind of stuck with what I knew and like the format that I knew. And that just, you know, everything about it is like comes from like the zine world, the size of it, because we wanted to be able to reproduce images, not just like, you know, there's like some full page 8.5 by 11 flyers and stuff in there. And it's like, you know, I feel like it loses its impact if you shrink it down too much, and then like having the 2 columns on each page that like comes from zine layout. And then, you know, if you think about like what is in every typical zine, you have interviews. So we have obviously a lot of those, record reviews. And I found, you know, like period record reviews, and included those. I found old, excerpts from interviews that Dan had done years ago that just, you know, lent credence to what he was saying in present day. Like this dude has felt the same way about these subjects for 30 years, essentially. Show reviews. There's like live show review excerpts in there from back in the day. And yeah, I mean, I'll just use this point to shout out our friend John Crone, who took my idea where I was just like, I think kind of a zine is sort of what I'm looking for. And he just took that and ran with it and did all of the layout. You know, I provided him with the text and all the images and kind of like worked with him in terms of what goes where, but he was the one that did all of the layout. And also his style in general for his other work that he does is like pretty contemporary. And I really like that about it, where it's not, you know, I feel like every kind of zine book memoir that sort of talks about like hardcore and punk especially has that sort of like cut and paste vibe to it, which I don't hate, obviously, but I thought it was fun to kind of go a different direction where it's like kind of slick, but the pictures and the stories and the subject matter is decidedly not. So I thought that was kind of like a cool thing where it made it a little more just sort of not like timeless, but not so like tied into like that, you know, kind of cut and paste scene. It's just sort of its own entity in that way.
how did you find the process, Dan, to go through? Because it, again, kind of projecting, I think, some of my own tendencies onto you through reading about you. I feel like you're someone who always kind of keeps your head down and just is going forward. You don't look back too often. So how did you find this process to be for you to kind of look back at your career?
Well, I mean, obviously being a musician who's been in bands that would be high profile, whatever, I was used to doing what you would call press. So people, the label would always, you'd put out a new release and then you'd sit in a conference room for 7 hours and, not coffee time anymore. Now it's beer time and, stuff like that. But so what Dave did to make this book happen, it was kind of like an interview on just brutal steroids, where it was just a very lengthy interview that we split into like weekends, where he would fly out to Rochester, New York from Chicago, and have these extended weekends. So it was cool because I knew that this was going to be in a book about me. So the point being, if you do an interview for a zine, you might get misquoted. You don't get to proofread anything like that. But I knew that this would be thorough, and I didn't. You could tell me if I'm wrong, Dave. I don't think I ever like really micromanaged it or anything. But I just like the fact that we'd have some control over the whole thing. It's not like I've been misquoted a million times, but look at some of the interviews you do now where people are obviously looking for clickbait and trying to get you to say something controversial and all that shit. And, so watch, this will be on Blabbermouth tomorrow. Dan Lilker said blah, blah. Yeah. No.
Dude, the amount of how that shit goes, though, like, it's wild to see because that's right about where I left off in the book, is the interviewee that was trying to bait you into that shit. And
right, yeah.
I see that enough from what I do, like where it's like sometimes I'll listen to, I kind of got out of music-based interviews and podcasts and such, but there'd be a couple where I'd listen and you could tell, here's the fucking headline grabbing question. And you're like, you didn't even like cover it up. It was very obvious. It's so out of left field. And then no shit, whenever they answer, however they answer, that's a headline. And it's like, that's so shitty. And it's like, you wouldn't do that to a person in person. Like typically you wouldn't go up to someone and then be like, all right, I fucking got you with this comment. Now I'm going to make you look like a dickhead to everybody.
Right. So like,
I would hope.
What are your influences? Because normal questions, what are your influences? And then it'll just sneak in. Tell us somebody you hate in the metal scene. I'm like, wow, where'd that come from? Go. All right, let's move on. Let's move on from that before that fucking takes a life of its own on.
Yeah, definitely not what I'm interested in. I like to get to know more of the person and how people go through the human experience. Something that I kind of, and again, I don't really know which of the two of you this kind of is. Obviously it's Danny's life and his story. So, but I think how Dave presented this, I think, was also interesting to me. Was you didn't sugarcoat, I should say, you didn't glamorize the drinking and drugs, which I thought was interesting because I feel like in a lot of books of this nature, there would be a lot of glamorization of it, the romanticization of like doing heroin and all this kind of shit. Like some other people have made books about where you're like, I don't think you could literally be on that much heroin and be cohesive enough to write any of this shit to fill a whole book. But I feel like your journey through everything was kind of about having fun, but also it was about the journey of self-exploration in the world around you. And it just so happened to be through, drinking psychedelics and so forth. Was that something you were kind of aware of, or was it just kind of a happenstance that it just comes across that way?
I mean, I'm really only a dabbler. I mean, to be honest, just like when it comes to alcohol, I'm mostly just a beer and white wine dude. I do smoke a lot of weed, but I can't remember the last time I've tripped, and I've certainly never put anything in my arm or anything. So drinking the drugs is pretty much beer and weed and wine. So it's nothing extreme. I don't even get fucking hangovers. So that was all just, you're out on the road with the metal bands, unless you have some straight edge agenda or something like that, then that shit's around all the time. And then you get to some venue at 2 p.m. They're like, you're going on at 11 and you're in the middle of nowhere in Kansas or something. You might just crack a beer and smoke a joint, make the day go quicker. That's really what a lot of that was, I don't know. But yeah, that's why I didn't feel uncomfortable talking about my drug use, because it's really just something that's actually legal in the state of New York now anyway. So there you go.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I mean, I like smoking pot too, and it's pretty much the entirety of this book, from the interviews to the transcriptions to the layout. I mean, somebody was probably high like while this was being worked on. Yeah, there's like, and again, this, like you were saying before, it's not like I had an agenda. The agenda was to like tell his story, and people smoked weed and drank beer along the way. It's like, it's just there. I don't know.
Yes, they did.
I just, like I said, I think just in conjunction to reading so many band bios and stuff like that, I wish it was handled with the same, just like, yeah, this is just what we did. But it almost seemed like there was an importance to it. Like, and then we went to so-and-so, and so-and-so used to do all the heroin or do all of da-da-da or whatever. And it's just like, then it creates like this thing where it's like, well, it's bad, and I knew it would be bad, and I'm foreshadowing and all this kind of stuff. But like I said, in the book, I just was like, it's just guys, almost like heavy metal parking lot kind of shit, where it's like, yeah, you're drinking, smoking, like who gives a shit? And it's, it's not hurting or affecting anybody. So, and then I think even, like you were saying, Dan, too, about how, you'd have some straight edge people, and it was never a point of contention, like us versus them kind of a thing. You were welcoming to everybody as long as they were welcoming to you. And so to me, I feel like, again, that just, it's not something I'm used to seeing, but I think speaks to kind of how things used to be. If something wasn't for you, it's fine. It's not for you, and it just doesn't need to be a part of your life. But now I feel like we live in a society and times where it's like, if you don't like something, then I have to tell you and tell you how to do things so it appeases me. So it just kind of also harkens back to a time that doesn't exist anymore, that I feel like anyway.
That's why I stay off the fucking internet.
Yeah.
And
you don't even have social media, do you?
No, and that's intentional. It's not because I'm a rock star. I'm just lazy and uninterested. I know we got to stop sometime soon. But before I forget, when you were talking about those movies where we're going to this bar to meet this dude, there were a lot of bands around. A lot of bands have this thing that I call the heroin mystique, where it's kind of like, ooh, I heard those guys shoot up. Ooh, and it's almost like the bands that would act like they were bikers when they didn't, all helmet and no hog or whatever the fuck the expression is. It just became kind of like a gimmick, where kind of like if they left it mysterious like that, and would leave doubt about it, then people wanted to hear more about it. And at the end of the day, it was, just pretty much a gimmick. Just like a new country dude who sings with a twang and then stops recording and goes, how'd that sound, man?
A question that I kind of kept thinking of as I'm getting closer to the end of the book is following you through your career, it seems like you've pretty much have done whatever you wanted to do, no compromise and no nothing, like you do what you want. Is there something, now that you hit a milestone age, is there something that you haven't done yet that you really would like to, musically or anything?
I've always thought it would be fun to play in kind of like what you would call like, a stoner rock band or something along the lines of stuff like Sleep and all that stuff. But there's a part of me that would just end up getting bored. I've been wanting to do the fast part. So I'd really have to have the willpower to do that and just stay in that lane. At my 60th birthday party, one of the bands here, Baba Yaga, I got up on stage with them and played 3 old Sabbath songs, which were, I believe, Electric Funeral, Snowblinds, and Children of the Grave. And that was really fun. I mean, of course, Geezer being amazing, stepping in his shoes to play those bass lines. But after having played very brutal, intense, complex, fucking grindcore at 8,000 miles an hour, etc., it was nice just to kick back. But I don't know if that would actually happen or not. I'm just answering your question.
Well, I had kind of wondered because I had gotten to the part in the book where you were talking about producing female vocals for something that was not super aggressive. And you were saying about how you enjoyed sort of the challenge and the newness of doing something that wasn't what you normally were doing, especially from a production standpoint. So kind of seeing that, you know, is one of the first glimpses where it's like you were kind of given this look into that maybe you would like to explore something else in that realm that's not what we would assume is something of yours, a project that you've done.
Well, sure. It's just a matter of how far I pursue that or not, and who I end up working with. But yeah, I always like to keep it interesting like that. I'm known for playing very intense music, but it's interesting to step out of your safe zone and, you know, think outside the box or whatever stupid other fucking phrases would cover that. But yeah, it just keeps it interesting for me.
So at this point, I know obviously, and I keep wanting to call this a second pressing because I'm so used to like vinyl terms and so forth. I know this is the second edition of the book. Is there plans to do a follow-up or do some sort of a different type of book instead of how this one was done, given the demand for how well the first pressing of this or the first edition of this book went, and that there's still a demand for your stories?
I can't really see that myself. One reason that the new edition didn't really have any extra chapters is because, honestly, between 2014 and 2024, I didn't really do as much music. I started slowing down. And by the time the book became unavailable, like 5 years ago, around 2019, I was definitely, you know, down to just like Nuclear Assault doing a show occasionally, and I was playing grindcore in a local band, Blurring, but that was a pretty low maintenance band. You know, we might go do a show in Buffalo, an hour drive from here or something once in a while. So I don't know. I think we covered everything pretty well. I think trying to squeeze more out of it in some other format or whatever, it just might end up getting redundant or repetitive, to be honest. But that's just me.
Dave, for you, is what have you been doing now that this is all done and coming back out? Like, what are you got coming up next then?
I mean, not really that much when it comes to writing. I mean, I'm in a band here in Chicago. I mean, I did another writing project. God, I did it like 2 years ago, but it came out like in December, which was a big like 12,000 word piece for this box set for this band Charles Bronson, who were from here. Yeah, just kind of like an overview of them, and those guys are friends of mine. So that was nice to be asked to do that. But yeah, I have no plans for another book. I just plan on shipping the ones that people are buying from our apartment here in Chicago.
So I got to ask, between New York and Chicago, and I live here in Michigan, who's got the better pizza in your opinions?
Oh man, you want to go down that road? Well, of course, New York. But then again, you take a deep dish pizza and you fuck it up. You know what? You got a loaf of bread with ketchup.
Oh man,
but hey,
that's funny, but it's also such a stereotype because all we eat here is thin crust anyway. It's just cut differently.
I know.
Nobody fucks with deep dish pizza. I know.
Well, I was going to say, as someone from Delaware originally that moved here in the Midwest when I was a kid, there are still people who I meet now that are like, "You're not from here," and I go, "I've lived here most of my life, but yeah, I'm an East Coaster through and through." So I was like poking fun at people, but I'm close enough to Chicago that we go quite often, so I know that it's a point for tourists to go to Luminaldi's and Giordano's and all that kind of stuff.
Nobody eats that shit. It's true.
All right, man. We're gonna have to unfortunately hit it because we got another one right on the 6 o'clock dot. So,
my bad. Yeah. Good.
No, if there's anything else, just go ahead and
Nope. I was just gonna say, where can everyone find you, or anything you'd like to plug online?
Me personally, no, and don't even look for me. Nah, I just would use this time to just thank all the people in the metal scene who are, going to be checking this out, whether or not you buy the book or not. Just thanks for being supportive, and we fucking appreciate it.
Yeah, just perpetualconversion.com. That's where you can go order it. That's all I've got to say.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat. And hopefully we'll get to do one of these down the road for something else, maybe.
All right. Cheers, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right, man. See ya.
So that was my conversation with Danny and Dave. Want to thank them once again for taking the time. Kind of one of those that I wish we could have had more time to chat, but, just sort of at the mercy of the press junkets that the two were on. I've really been enjoying finding a lot of the other interviews they've been doing on various other podcasts, especially just go to YouTube, type in Danny Lilker, and, you'll find a bunch of these new interviews. Dude's got stories for days, and I think at the time of me doing this chat with him, I still had maybe 40 or 50 pages to go. The book is like about 400 pages, so it goes pretty quick, especially with a lot of the illustrations, photos, and so forth of everything. You're able to kind of blow through the book a little bit faster, but it's one of those things where, it's crazy to get to talk to someone like this, to me. Like I said, kind of in the intro, like I grew up with my dad and my uncles and so forth, and people in my family listening to a lot of, the early thrash stuff of Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Testament, like, a lot of those bands I grew up listening to in my parents' house. And, like I said, even reading like I want to say it was like Metal Maniacs and might have been like Circus Magazine and like Hit Parader and stuff like that. I think my dad had old magazines plus Rolling Stone and all those kind of things as well. So just kind of being so indoctrined to a lot of this thrash and heavier music kind of growing up. I don't really know that I don't know that many people have that upbringing. I do vaguely remember when the Stormtroopers of Death record came out and my dad just blasting the shit out of that. And thinking it was cool. I enjoyed the music. I remember, I forget what video it was. I think there was a video that SOD had on MTV and just being like, this band's crazy. But remembering at the time, the big hoopla around it was it's Scott Ian and Danny Lilker from Anthrax. And, some people saying this is better than the Anthrax record that just came out or had come out at the time. And, maybe Dan's the missing piece and all this kind of stuff. It's really crazy. Some of these memories that get unlocked when you're doing random things, or maybe it's just me. I'm kind of having a lot of experiences of unlocking, I guess, core memories. But throughout this book, I had a lot of those, thinking back to those days growing up and hanging out with my family and coming back here to Michigan before we lived here and, playing pool at my uncle's house and just, different types of music being played and stuff like that. Like, I am a product, as I say, of when I grew up, having younger parents, having younger aunts and uncles, so still feeling like I was kind of connected to something that wasn't too far beyond what I would find on my own down the road, finding a band like Pantera at the time and being like, man, Pantera is pretty fucking cool. And my dad being like, yeah, I like Pantera. I like a couple of songs I've seen on the radio or seen on MTV or whatever. And it's just a thing where it's sort of where the foundation and the love of heavy music came from was growing up with it. And like I said, reading the book, it just kind of takes you to a time and place where you feel, even in other people's recounts of seeing Danny play in the various bands or what different records meant to these, artists themselves, it's still a reminder that this music, anything kind of starts small. And it's kind of a local small few that really kind of carry the torch for it and kind of keep expanding it and kind of tell you about other things and then kind of brings back, the message of these things to others and gets them, the word going and gets others involved. And, it's the spark. And to me, getting to talk to someone like Danny, getting to talk to someone like Dave even, like, that was kind of the weird thing, as I have the Dilla book now, called Dilla Time by Dan Charnas. I'm kind of making my way through it, but it's really interesting, even in reading this book, the Dilla book, to Danny's. It's interesting to hear how it's shaped by where you grow up. It's shaped by where you live. It's shaped by the people around you. It's shaped by the music you listen to. It's all relative. And even though they're two completely different people who play two completely styles of different music, it's all very similar in how it starts. And I think that's the interesting thing. If you're willing to dig a little bit deeper and you're willing to have those that are willing to take the time to kind of curate and narrate this experience for you, I think it's important. Especially, like right now, with a lot of, I'll at least speak to the Dilla book and I'll kind of start wrapping everything up. It's interesting kind of reading about how with Dilla, it was about sort of the different ways that Detroit was being built, the way that Detroit had been founded by two different, architects and engineers, and how they wanted to lay out the city, and how it kind of does things that it's not supposed to, because at some point everything sort of meets, and it's two different plans and it's two different ways of thought of living, and it just is how Detroit is. And what's interesting to me as I read it is I have been on these roads that they're talking about that don't make sense. And when you're there, you're like, why the fuck does this road go this way now? Like, why is there all these one ways? And I have to go almost halfway out of the area I'm in just to come back and get it because of all the one ways. And the roads don't make any sense the way they are, because they go one way and they're kind of perpendicular, and then they just kind of jut against each other and end. And just, it's so infuriating. But to read this book and how that may be correlated to Dilla approaching music from a different perspective as well, because it's not all linear. It's not all, it just goes this way. Like, we got to break the rules sometimes and do things that are unconventional and push the boundaries. And people like Dilla and Danny Lilker are those people who pushed their respective scenes and sounds into different territories. And everyone, a lot of people can be forever thankful. And I am one of those people. All of that to say, let's start wrapping up the episode. Danny, as you heard, does not have any social media. I couldn't find anything for Dave either, so I'm just going to push the one thing, and the whole reason that they're even on the show. Go to perpetualconversion.bigcartel.com to pick up the new second edition of the book. It is very great. I think if you are a fan of heavy music, if you are a fan of Anthrax, if you are a fan of any of the bands that Danny has been in, if you're a fan of any of the styles of bands that Danny has been in, I think you will enjoy this book. I think there is something in it for everybody. And the way that Dave was able to weave Danny's stories and everyone else's stories into just a really complete narrative arc. And to me, I honestly, when I was done, I was like, it sucks that I have such a good memory for things I've read and can retain them very well. Because this is definitely something I would want to read again if I forgot some of the stories that different people had told, or Danny's stories. This is also one of those books, very much like the Wu-Tang book, that Jordan Buckley still has. I think it's going to be a book that I kind of want to get and just let people borrow just to experience the book, because I think it's entertaining, it's fun, and like I said, it just fills in a lot of kind of the gaps if you're of a certain age and aren't as versed with some of these bands and so forth in the time of Danny kind of coming up into his own. So no socials for them. Go to Perpetual Conversion, bigcartel.com, pick up a copy of the book if you would like. Otherwise, look for it in a local library, or maybe suggest it going to a library, and then that way the stories can be shared with other people. That's something, listening to a lot of How Did This Get Made, they talk about how you can request these movies at your public libraries. They'll get them in. They'll be free. Keep these essentially an independent store of sorts, but I'll keep the libraries up and running. I have a library card. I've been trying to get back into reading. So I am trying to be a proponent of pushing, go to your public library, try to find a book. If you don't have it, if they don't have what you're looking for, ask them to get it. And then hopefully somebody else that maybe is into music or whatever will see that book, be like, yo, I'm a metalhead too. I'm going to check this story out. If you like Keep Up with the Podcast, simple enough, Bruce Speakbot on all your major social media platforms. Email me at brutallyspeaking@gmail.com. Rate, review, subscribe. You know why that is important. I want to thank everybody lately for doing those things over the last couple episodes. It has been actually more than the last couple. It's been really great getting to kind of carry on some of the conversations from the episodes, some things that you guys have been taking away from the conversations. It's been really fun and something I really kind of hope to grow in this new year. And something I would like to see grow as well, and it already is, going over to Rockabilia. Go to rockabilia.com. Check out their online store of over probably 100,000 items at this point. I know they're really, really, really pushing Bring Me the Horizon stuff based on all their sponsored ads I see on everything. I was talking with Frankie a little while ago going like, dude, did you like, do you have stock in Bring Me the Horizon at this point with all these sponsored ads? And apparently one of the companies they had bought out, I think last year, just had a ton of Bring Me the Horizon stuff. So they've been pushing that. If you're a Bring Me fan, go check it out. They got suitcases, just a slew of t-shirts from a few different eras, touring cycles of the band. Lots of other cool stuff. Obviously, they announced the toy line that they're doing, starting with Milo from the Descendants. I believe that's still up for Kickstarter right now, but go support them. Use our code BREWtally at checkout. Take 10% off your total purchase order. Support them for supporting us. Let them continue to grow, do a lot of cool things. There's some more stuff on the horizon. Always with those people. They're always working with the best and latest bands, coming up with really cool, interesting merch ideas. So head on over there, save some money while you're at it. And for the BREWtally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I'll see you all next week, where I have Scott, Dave, and Steven from Haste the Day. That was a really fun conversation, long time coming, and I'm excited to get that one out to you. Enjoy the rest of your day, your week, whatever it is. Enjoy it, and I will see you all next time.